Hey, welcome back to Low Budget Logistics, your logistics and supply chain explainer, where we use cheap models to explain some really difficult and deep concepts. Today we're going to be talking about why the supply chain loves economics and why economics just loves the supply chain. And so this is going to be really kind of economics 101 because the world of the supply chain really lives in that sort of macro, really top-end scale economics, right? So we'll kind of get into that. So obviously supply chain is going to be part of the supply and demand equation, right? Kind of indicated here by this really terrible looking seesaw here. But where we put like supply on one side and demand on the other, the two need to equal each other, right? So that's sort of the fundamental part of economics, is supply and demand and the relationship between those two things. So if you have demand but you don't have supply, then you don't have a market. And a market being like the exchange of goods or ideas or stuff like that. It's really deep concept, but we don't really need to worry about that right now. Really, let's just talk about how the supply chain and economics really function together. So first, the supply chain is a large global market, and it plays, like I said, in that macroeconomic sphere where we're talking about countries, we're talking about regions, global issues, we're talking about really, really big scale things. It does not normally dip down into the microeconomic world, but it can in really specific ways, especially as we supply chain professionals start to work into those global markets and those global or regional avenues within that sort of marketplace. So first we should talk about what a marketplace is, right? So in the terms of the supply chain, think of marketplace as like Amazon. It's a place for people who are wanting to sell something to come to people who are wanting to buy stuff. That's as simple as that. The supply chain has a lot of those different marketplaces, one of which is the marketplace for logistics and transportation, because that's a place where someone who's selling, right? So some owner of a truck, owner of a plane, owner of a boat will anyways, the owner of those places, of those items, are going to come and they're going to sell that, what we call capacity. They're going to sell that to someone with the intent of making some money off of it. And capacity is a fantastic example of a finite marketplace, right? It's a finite resource where there's only so much of it that exists at any given time, and it can only be used kind of sparingly. It's not an infinite resource. There's a lot of it, and that's where we sort of need to understand there's a lot of capacity, but there are times that it all gets used up, and it's hard to imagine that being the case, but it happens all the time. Now in those instances, right, so supply chain supply and demand in supply chain marketplaces, it happens in a lot of ways. Most agreements occur within, say, a quarter of the year. So 3 months or so is a typical contract time. But there are other contracts that happen at a much lower scale, right? Even it could change day to day. There are certain marketplaces in the supply chain which the prices may vary for the same good, right? We're again just talking about logistics. The same capacity may have a changing price by the minute. That's a pretty rare and unique situation, but it does happen. And so there may be things that you might see rates change day by day for the same movement. It's really high concept stuff, but it's an understanding that there's a lot of friction in the marketplace. There's a lot of like things that happen and provide a lot of wrangling that needs to occur. So one of the things that you see a lot in the supply chain are people like brokers or larger firms that can help control that change, right? Because if this seesaw was constantly moving up and down, you'd have a hard time like building a business as these things change and fluctuate. And so there will be a time, right? There's a necessity for larger organizations to exist, which can control some of that and help stabilize that that seesaw from happening. It is not perfect competition. It's not a perfect marketplace, but there is a reason for it, and that reason is stability. And it's a thing that we need in the supply chain because a lot of things happen several months in advance of when you might receive payment for it. So a great example is an e-commerce retailer or even just anyone selling something is going to have to guess and make a forecast about what might happen in the future. And the expectation is that you're going to be selling something at a price in the future. And you need to understand that it takes time to make things. And that's sometimes a little bit difficult for people to understand, is that there's a time involved. And there are certain seasons where certain products can only be produced in that season, right? So if you think about apples, they're only going to be sold, right? They're going to be made, at least in the US, during the fall. And there's other things that happen as well as we start looking in the supply chain. But one of the key drivers of the economy is the holiday period, right? So I'm talking about the time from, we'll call it Black Friday, so the day after Thanksgiving here in the US, all the way up until the Christmas season or the Christmas holiday itself, so December 25th. That period drives a lot of economic growth in the US, and a lot of retailers are buying inventory in advance of that, in expectation that they're going to sell that stuff during that time period for the highest price. Well, all that stuff has to get produced way earlier in the year. So typically, forecasters, which is it's actually a job within kind of operations. It's not necessarily part of the supply chain, but it is a job and it's a specialty. They'll look at expectations, and they'll make a forecast based off of what they expect to be selling during that sales period. Now, they will hand that information off to someone else who will then go and buy it. They'll go find someone to make that item, and they'll get produced. And sometimes it will take, right, depending on the volume of stuff that you're buying, it will take some time to get made and then shipped to you, because international shipping, though quick, it does take time, and it could be as much as a month just sitting on a boat coming from, like, let's say China into the US. So there's timing that needs to be involved in there, and then you have to think about the downstream effects of getting it into the right spot to get sold. So there's a lot of sort of larger economic things that are happening every day in the supply chain, and that people are working to mitigate. Another thing that we have to think about, I had to think about a lot in my career as a logistician, is the price of gas, which changes all the time, and it affects my price for shipping. And right, you go and fill your tank up one day, and you might pay $3 a gallon, and then you go and fill up another day, and it might cost, I don't know, $3.30. Right, that change in price, even from day to day, is going to affect shipping and transportation. So there's a lot of expectations, and there's a lot of hedging of bets that has to be made within the supply chain and within the specific market that you're in to control for that cost. And so it is a fascinating thing. And as supply chain professionals, we have to keep our eyes on the news to know what's happening at a macro level with larger global sort of entities, and then also at a micro level as far as what it is that we are actually shipping and why we're shipping it, and all of those many things. So that's a really brief explanation of why the supply chain and economics really love each other, why they're in this really deep relationship, and why it's this fascinating thing to sort of start peeling through the layers of the onion as we sort of go down into it. So all that being said, I hope you really enjoyed the video today. Like I said last time, you probably know the supply chain. This is for your friends. This is to share with others, to help explain to them what it is that you do and the things that cause you stress at night. I know that the market causes me a lot of stress. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said, please like and subscribe down below, and share with your friends who don't know what you do. And I hope that you have a great day.